The Long Discourses, Digha Nikaya, translated by Bhikkhu Sujato. The Long Discourses, Dhamma as Literature and Compilation by Bhikkhu Sujato. A general introduction. The Digha Nikaya is the first of the four main divisions in the Sutta Pitaka of the Pali Canon, Tipitaka. It is translated here as Long Discourses. As the title suggests, its discourses are somewhat longer than those of other Nikayas. There are, however, only 34 discourses in the collection, so despite the length of the individual discourses, the collection as a whole is the shortest of the Nikayas. It is distinguished from the other Nikayas by its more developed and elaborate literary forms. Outgrowing the bare and direct style of most of the early texts, here the extra length offers space for narratives and doctrinal expositions to find a fuller expression. This is an early hint at how the literary form of Buddhist texts was to develop in later years, moving towards expansiveness and abundance. It is no coincidence that these elaborate texts are often addressed to the Brahmins, who were the self-proclaimed spiritual leaders of the time. The Brahmins were the custodians of the most sophisticated texts in ancient India up to this time, the Vedic literature. It seems that one aim of the Digha was to impress such learned men. These discourses offer a wide range of examples of how the Buddha related to those of other religious paths. Another overriding theme of the Digha is the passing away of the Buddha. The centerpiece of the collection is Digha Nikaya 16, the Great Discourse on the Buddha's extinguishment, Mahaparinibbana Sutta, a discourse of unrivaled importance. This presents the last journey of the Buddha, wandering in unhurried stages from town to town, each step bringing him closer to his passing. In the very length of the text, recording so many details of the journey, we can sense a longing to draw out those last precious days as far as possible. How the Digha is organized. The 34 discourses are grouped in 3 vaggas or chapters. The first vagga consists of 13 discourses, each of which includes a lengthy passage on the spiritual practice of a monastic, known as the gradual training. In the second vagga, we find a number of discourses of a more biographical nature. Digha Nikaya 14, the Great Discourse on the Harvest of Deeds, Mahapadana Sutta, tells of past Buddhas, while Digha Nikaya 16, Mahaparinibbana, tells of Gautama's last days. In addition, a number of other discourses in this section are closely related to the Mahaparinibbana. I will discuss this cycle further below. The final vagga is more miscellaneous. It includes long poetic sections, doctrinal compilations, some of which are precursors to the Abhidhamma, and narratives that are often humorous and occasionally border on farce. As usual in the Nikayas, there is no overall sequence of the teaching, and many details of organization appear quite arbitrary. Still, we can discern a purpose in the arrangement of a few of the major discourses. These details are unique to the Theravadan tradition, so should be seen as reflecting their concerns rather than the fundamental principles of the Digha. The first discourse, Digha Nikaya 1, the prime net, Brahmajala Sutta, sets out a scheme of wrong views and thus acts as a filter for the Dhamma, screening out possible misinterpretations. It seems that this arrangement was connected with the events of the so-called Third Council under King Ashoka, at a time when the Sangha was overrun with impostors who were not genuine Buddhists. The second discourse, Digha Nikaya 2, the Fruits of the Ascetic Life, Samanapala Sutta, addresses a fundamental question: why do people follow a life of renunciation? In answering this, it sets forth the gradual training, a distinctively Buddhist path to peace. The middle of the collection is dominated by discourses that deal, in one way or another, with the cosmic significance of the Buddha. Where the biographical texts of the Majjhima emphasize the practical and the personal, the specifics of how our Buddha lived, these discourses exist in an arena of mythic grandeur. Time and space are expanded as the poignant and personal details of the Mahaparinibbana are set among a series of mythological texts that show the potency of the Buddha and his teachings in the deep past, in the apocalyptic future, and in the present among the orders of gods. The central event in all this is the death of the Buddha. Historically, this was a traumatic crisis for the Buddhist community, and many feared that the Dhamma would not survive. By lifting attention from the present trauma and pointing to a longer meaning, these suttas show that the Dhamma need not die with the Buddha. The events of the Mahaparinibbana spurred the Sangha to hold the first council, where the discourses were collected and organized to ensure their preservation. And these are, of course, the very scriptures that we are reading. In this way, these narratives tell the story of their own origin. The Digha finishes with mostly doctrinal compilations. If the beginning of the Digha tells us why the teachings matter, and the middle tells us how they came to be, the ending tells us what they are. It is a rather curious thing that in the Digha, many of the doctrines that we think of as fundamental to the Buddha's teachings occur only rarely. These discourses rectify this situation, ensuring that the students of the Digha had access to a wide range of teachings. The last two discourses in particular are clearly compiled as handy mnemonics for memorizing sets of doctrinal teachings. The gradual training. The gradual training sets out the steps taken by a Buddhist renunciate on their path. It begins with the arising of a Buddha in the world. Hearing the Buddha's teaching, a person reflects on how best it can be applied to their own life. Realizing that the household life is cramped and dirty, but the life of one gone forth is wide open, they give up their worldly possessions and attachments, don the ochre robe of a Buddhist mendicant, and undertake a life of morality, simplicity, and meditation. Proceeding step by step to ever more advanced practices, they eventually enter into deep meditative absorption, jhana, before realizing the Four Noble Truths and finding true freedom. The gradual training is an expansion of the threefold training, Tisosika, ethics, sila, meditative immersion, samadhi, and wisdom, panya. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the three trainings are defined. Ethics, in a monastic context, requires keeping the monastic rules. Meditative immersion is the four absorptions. Wisdom is the understanding of the Four Noble Truths. This teaching is distributed widely throughout the early Buddhist texts. In the Digha, for example, it's found in the Mahaparinibbana as a standard teaching repeated by the Buddha at many of the stops on his journey. A series of shorter discourses on this subject may be found in the Samanavagga of the Anguttara. This brief overview of the path is explained more fully in the gradual training, which explains each of the three trainings in considerable detail. This longer exposition appears to have been the original teaching on the overall lifestyle, practices, and aims of the Buddha's mendicant followers. It seems that the Buddha preferred to encourage his monastics by exhorting them to follow the highest ideals of conduct and meditation. Only reluctantly did he set up the legal system of the Vinaya texts with its procedures and punishments. The gradual training is found in somewhat varying forms in the Majjhima, the Anguttara, and even the Abhidhamma. Curiously enough, however, it is not found among the collected discourses on the path found in the last book of the Samyutta. While virtually all of the practices of the gradual training are found in the Samyutta, the overall framework is not found. The Digha makes up for this lack by placing a Vagga of 13 discourses right at the start, featuring the gradual training. This is called the Sila Kanda Vagga, the chapter on the aggregate of ethics. Despite the title, however, these texts treat the full training on ethics, meditative immersion, and wisdom. While the content is similar in each place that the gradual training appears, the Digha versions feature a pronounced emphasis on beauty and pleasure. The stages of the path are illustrated by similes that are as lovely as they are apt, while each step of the path is said to be accompanied by a deepening sense of pleasure and happiness. The gradual training is not a path of suffering, but one of grace and joy and freedom. Due to the repetition, the texts invariably abbreviate all the expositions except for the first two discourses. It should be remembered, however, that this is merely a consequence of how the Pali tradition arranged these texts. In the Sanskrit and Chinese Dirghagamas, the texts in this section are arranged differently, and different suttas are either expanded or abbreviated accordingly. While the focus is firmly on monastic life, the general principles hold good for everyone, and indeed in Majjhima Nikaya, a trainee, Sekha Sutta, Ananda teaches essentially the same path to a lay audience. In the Sila Kanda Vagga, many discourses are in fact addressed to lay people, most of whom are Brahmins. The question of King Ajatasattu in Digha Nikaya 2 provides the key to understanding why this is so. He points out that in worldly life, each trade can be seen to have its own benefit. But what is the benefit of the renunciate life? While other ascetics falter before this question, the Buddha presents the gradual training. He shows how the life gone forth is not one of pain and distress, nor one of delayed gratification, but one that shows real benefits in this life. It is about the power and transformative potential of inner development and meditation. In contrast, the household path offers only limited happiness, with much uncertainty and stress, while the paths of other ascetics are unclear, ineffective, or painful, and the Brahmins can only offer rituals and prayers of dubious efficacy. Thus, the gradual training explains why there is a need for the Sangha at all. Just as the gradual training is built from the kernel of the threefold training, the code of monastic ethics is built from the core principles of basic precepts. It is divided into three sections. The first section begins with the most fundamental precept for everyone in Buddhism, non-violence, to refrain from killing any creature, however small. It continues with items found in such common teachings as the 5 precepts and the 10 paths of skillful action. But it adds items that specifically pertain to monastic life, such as avoiding luxuries and ownership of property. The second section on ethics expands these specifically monastic and renunciate precepts in much greater detail, while the final section deals with right livelihood. A Buddhist monastic who relies on alms food given in faith should not make a living by other means, especially through superstitious and magical practices. The gradual training builds on these ethical foundations as the mendicant undertakes a series of practices designed to quell the busyness and activity of the mind. They rein in their senses, avoiding things that are overly stimulating. They focus on remaining mindful and aware throughout all their activities. They aim at contentment, being satisfied with a few simple possessions. Only when all these have been developed does the mendicant resort to seclusion for meditation. Going to the forest, they undertake mindfulness meditation and give up the 5 hindrances that prevent peace of mind. These hindrances are one of the core meditation teachings in the suttas, regarded as the key obstacle to absorption. They are sensual desire, includes any kind of craving, greed, or desire for sensual experience. It includes powerful forms such as sexual desire, as well as more subtle kinds of attachment. Ill will, anything from outright hatred to subtle forms of annoyance and aversion come under this hindrance. Dullness and drowsiness. When the mind begins to settle down in meditation, it commonly becomes sleepy or dull. Restlessness and remorse. Restlessness is always looking for some future experience, while remorse keeps digging up the past, especially moments of regret. Doubt. It is normal and healthy to doubt when it comes to things that we do not know, but if we do not understand the elements of what is right and what is wrong, doubt will subtly undermine our meditation. Experiencing an ever-deepening peace and bliss, they ultimately enter a series of profoundly still states of meditative immersion known as the 4 absorptions, jhanas. The absorptions are the fundamental meditation practice in early Buddhism and are essential to all stages of awakening. They occur in many contexts, but it is here, in the gradual training, that they emerge most naturally from the life and practice undertaken by the mendicants. This context was so central to early Buddhists that when they compiled the early Abhidhamma text, the Vibhanga, the chapter on absorption begins with the gradual training. It is true there are lay followers in the early texts who are said to have practiced absorption, but it is equally true that when the Buddha taught how to attain such profound peace, he emphasized the power of deep renunciation. It has become common in certain modern forms of Buddhism to assert that absorptions are not an essential part of the path. Others say that, while important, the absorptions are relatively shallow states of concentration that may be easily attained on a short retreat. Suffice to say, neither of these views find support in the early texts. The absorptions are essential, profound, and difficult to attain. Even with the full strength of renunciation, many mendicants in the Buddha's day struggled to realize them. Nevertheless, it is a special quality of the Dhamma that each step along the path is accompanied by deepening peace and joy, and letting go gets easier the further one travels. This is what makes the realization of even such profound and subtle states possible. Emerging from the absorptions, the mendicant harnesses the power of a deeply purified mind to realize a series of special forms of knowledge or insight. These culminate in the realization of the Four Noble Truths. 1. Suffering, dukkha. 2. The origin, samudaya, of suffering, i.e. craving. 3. The cessation, nirodha, of suffering, i.e. nibbana. 4. The practice, magga, that leads to the end of suffering. Suffering is the spur that drives us to undertake spiritual practice. Only when we have some experience of suffering will we look for an escape, and when encountering the Buddha's teaching, a seeker recognizes that the Dhamma speaks to that which matters in their own life, offering a powerful and pragmatic solution. But wallowing in suffering gets you nowhere. When you understand that this suffering is real but has causes and conditions that you can do something about, it sparks faith and the resolve to act. The path itself is one of unfolding happiness and receding pain. The truth of the ending of suffering is experienced at every step. This culminates in the experience of profound meditative stillness called absorption, jhana, or immersion, samadhi. In such states, having let go of sensual desire, the 5 external senses cease, and the mind feels a peace and happiness unlike anything it has known before. Empowered by the clarity and brilliance of absorption, the reality of suffering and its cause becomes apparent. This signifies that one has realized the first stage of awakening, that of the stream enterer, sotapanna. Stream entry occurs when all the factors of the path, from the arousing of faith to the practice of absorption and deep insight, have been developed to a sufficient degree. At this point, one has a profound insight into the nature of reality, letting go 3 of the 10 fetters that bind a person to rebirth. In the gradual training, the understanding of the Four Noble Truths is usually followed by the understanding of the end of the defilements, asava, which signifies the attainment of full perfection, arahata. The remaining fetters are given up at this point, which is the final stage of the path, full awakening and freedom.